When we think of the stars of the wild, wild west, we think of the cowboys, the gunslingers, the American pimps and saloon owners. We glorify their lives even if most of them lived a life that should be cast in shame. The women of the wild, wild west get pushed into the dark, dark depths of history, cast in shame and told they are victims and have fallen into the sin of freedom.
I got something between my legs that'll make a dead man come. Oh, that. I got something between my legs that'll make a dead man come. Oh, that. I'm gonna turn back my mattress and let you all my springs. I want you to find me, daddy, till the bell do ring. Oh, daddy, want you to shade and drive.
Hello, my name is Summer, and this is Paying For It. Thank you for being here for episode 23. Today's episode will be a bit different. However, I thought Deadwood deserves a conclusion, at least for its wild, wild west days. Believe it or not, Deadwood will continue to run a very prosperous tolerance for years to come. Today, though, I wanted to conclude the deep dive we accidentally took beginning the Deadwood era, really. We really only covered the beginning days of Deadwood, so I'm concluding that little series. We may later go on and discuss Deadwood's later history in prostitution, which has a very rich history, actually. Before we get to that, I highly, highly suggest you follow so you can keep up to date with the new episodes being released early Thursday mornings. And if you are really vibing with me and my spicy takes on history, I highly suggest that you subscribe to my video versions that come out early Monday or early Sunday mornings, sometime Mondays. Sorry about that. Anywho, how is everyone doing? I hope you all are having a wonderful, wonderful rest of your week and starting your weekend off well. I should take a moment to let you know that I'm recording a little differently today. When I've gotten the wires out of the way, I won't have to be tapping. I've got this lovely iPad with me so that we can read my scripts portable, I guess. I thought we'll see how this works. Hopefully it looks better than me constantly having to edit out me leaning forward and reaching between the mic and cords to press next. So that's what we're doing today, at least. And if it doesn't work out, well, we'll be back to regular program, I guess. But I think this is going to be nice for me, at least. We'll see. Yes. Oh, also I got finally a spare battery so that we can take our time. We don't have to feel so rushed. And I think that will help, bring the real vibe I'm going for. At least for episodes that are longer, I don't have to wait to let my battery record at the very least, okay? Or battery recharge at the very least, So we have that spare battery so we cannot feel so rushed. We love that for ourselves. Other than that, not much going on for me, just working, reading, and researching. I'm currently reading, I just finished this spooky book. It was called A Head Full of Ghosts by Paul Tremblay, and it was a very interesting book. Listen, I feel like I never have, I always am like, it's very interesting. Yeah, but it is a very interesting book. It has a very interesting plot, and it has I would say a very good plot. What it is about a family of 4. They have the 2 kids are 2 sisters. One's a teenager. One's about 8 years old, and basically we start the book thinking they're a normal family, but we know something happens because we read horror books, and we find out eventually that the older sister, has been diagnosed with schizophrenia, and we kind of follow that path for a bit, and then things get weird because the father gets very religious, and he convinces the family that she is possessed and that she needs an exorcism. But not only that, after he gets his family, who's, to be honest, not very religious in the beginning of the book, he convinces his family to agree to this. He also then convinces the family to televise this whole situation, which is absolutely insane to me to think of something like that happening, but nowadays probably would, to be honest. Anyways, I think that it was a very good book. I have mixed opinions on it, because I would say it's a good book for the plot and the twist that happened. I kind of seen it coming, but in a different way. And then when we find out what happens, I'm like, oh shit, okay. But so very interesting little twist there at the end. I would say though, the main character, we're seeing this all through the little sister's eyes, who's 8 years old, and she is just a girl looking for normalcy, and you're feeling bad for her the whole time, but you're also like semi-irritated with her because she's an 8-year-old and she's just kind of all over the place. And yeah, so if you get that, like, if you're like not a fan of following books that follow a child's point of view, this one might not be for you. Although I liked it and I finished it and I enjoyed it, but more her like just 8-year-oldness got to me a little bit, I guess. I don't know. Honestly, so that's that, I guess. I really did enjoy it, I think. Clearly I'm having mixed feelings about it because like I said, the main character. But if you're into something like that and the plot sounds interesting, you should check it out. It was written pretty well and you'd probably enjoy it if that's something if my description has sounded interesting. Jesus. Okay, let's get to it. Today, we will be jumping into a bit of a different episode, and that is because today we aren't talking about a Madame, a Vice doll, or even a trans woman of the night. No, today we will be talking about a very vile man that got glorified and still today is glorified. Not because I want to give his story more attention, more because this is history, and again, I want to tell the good, the bad, and the ugly of all parts of this history. So I feel like we can learn a thing or two from this man's story, and it would be weird, I guess, to talk about Deadwood and those who ran the Love by the Hour without mentioning him. We will not title this episode his name because we will not give him that kind of credit. I'm going to tell you right now, here and now, if it isn't already clear, we don't like this guy. We don't stand for this man, okay? And I hope at the end of this, you also don't stand for this man. But like I said, we can learn from it, and we can also have a little bit of a mini conversation at the end here about why he's glorified and why our other Madams of Deadwood are not. So yeah, that's that. I also think that the comparison between the ladies that we've already talked about and this man will be talking about today is very fascinating. It's very fascinating because they are completely different. It's like they're a different species. So I'm here to tell you the true side of his story, his life and his life story. I want you to really understand who this man is and not who the man on the TV show was. His story is very intertwined in Deadwood's history, so we should talk about him. I also hope that in this is a bit of a learning moment, a moment of conversation towards the end for sure. This episode, because I have some thoughts and I need to get these thoughts out, honestly. Yeah, that's that. I think his story is so intertwined with Deadwood that it would be impossible, or it would be wrong of me not to touch on his story, not to talk about it, on why it's important and what his story actually does to damage the women's history of love by the hour, and why it's important that we don't let that happen. We rectify that situation, I guess. However, before I start, I would like to point out here that here on Paying For It, I don't hate men. Okay, sometimes when I'm in editing, I'm like, I go hard on these dudes, but some of these dudes, they definitely deserve it, okay? I go hard on them, but I just want to say hashtag not all men. However, the ones that are vile deserve it. So if you are someone who finds it hard to hear criticism on glorified men of our history who don't deserve it, warning. This one is not for you. And that is okay. We can still be friends and you can move on. Keep moving, keep scrolling. You don't have to listen to this one because this is a criticism on a glorified man of our past that doesn't deserve it. So that's your fair warning. All right. So if it's not for you, move on along. That's okay. I will see you next week. So with that, you know what time it is. Grab yourself a cocktail, a mocktail, a coffee, whatever you fancy. Today I have half drinking coffee. I tried to record this a little bit earlier, but my mom called me 7 million times. And even when I pressed record on this one, she also called me again. I denied it. Sorry, Mom. I've been having power issues, whatever. So I made this earlier. It was an iced coffee. It looks so cute. Whatever. We're here now. So whatever you have, I hope you're enjoying it. And I hope you have a great time listening to this story. Cheers, 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 cheers. And I guess let's get into it, shall we? All right. Let me introduce you to the unfortunate main character of Deadwood, who is famously infamous for taking all the credit away from the ladies and putting it into his evil pockets. Al Swingen, born Ellis Albert Swingen, along with his twin brother Lemuel. They were both born July 8th, 1845, to parents Daniel J., who was a farmer, and mother Keziah or Katie Montgomery. She, of course, was a housemaker, because the twins would go on to be the eldest of 8 children. And his younger years are, you guessed it, a mystery to history. However, we do know that the family lived in Okaloosa, Iowa. Al lived with his parents well into adulthood, not leaving the family house until late into his life, which is interesting, but most likely it was because he was working on the farm with his father. It kind of happens that way, honestly. Eventually, though, Al decides it's time to leave home and branch out on his home. Moving to Custer City, South Dakota. It is important to note that at this point, gold had not been discovered yet in Deadwood. So in Custer, before the gold rush was happening, was the town to be, basically. When he moved there, he started running a little shack in Custard, according to an 1882 Black Hills Pioneer news article that ran on Al for a special New Year's article. They stated that he ran this dance shack in Custard, and it was a 30 by 150 feet in dimension. It was this rundown shack in Custer downtown. It was quite popular, though, according to him, of course, in Custer. Apparently at any point in the day any point in the day or night, you could go there and it would be packed full of men that you had to push through, like shoulder to shoulder. This was like a little saloon dance hall that he had, and it was probably one of the only ones in Custard for its time. In order to get inside, you would have to fight the shoulder to shoulder mass amount of men who were already stuffed inside this little ass shack. But they were feeling it, apparently. Not much else is known about this shack that he ran in Custer, other than, according to him and the article, it was a popular happening place, and you could get all your little vice, probably, other than ladies. I think it was ran as a dance hall. I'm not positive. There could be sex work going on there, but as far as we know, it was just kind of a little saloon dance hall where girls, you could go to buy dances from, and they would sell you alcohol, as far as we know. What those girls did on their side hustle, that's up to them to know. We're not sure. So as I've been writing and researching this story of him, I was wondering, at what moment did he become such a vile person? Was it here in his first dance hall? Was he born this way, or was he just the time that allowed him to descend into a slow madness of an evil man? I'm not sure, though I'm getting ahead of myself, so we'll come back to that point. Anyways, Al is running the shack in Custard when, in the summer of 1874, the U.S. 7th Cavalry began their Black Hills expedition. The purpose of this expedition was to basically explore the uncharted territories of the Black Hills. I would like to point out that it was uncharted for the U.S. military, at least, because we all know our land was never undiscovered, as it was occupied by the Native Americans. During this expedition, though, gold is discovered in the French Creek, and this starts the beginning of the gold rush to the Black Hills. In the fall of the same year, a small party of prospectors hit it big by discovering gold in the Deadwood Gulch, which was the creek/river that was full of dead-looking trees and, a shit ton of gold. Now, this is big and is the cause of the boom towns, which started off as 7 mining camps: Montana City, Fountain City, Elizabethtown, Deadwood City, South Deadwood, Ingleside, and Cleveland. This caused mass amounts of men to rush into those mining camps in the Black Hills in the hopes of hitting it big on some gold, baby. Now, we have talked about it in previous couple of episodes on Deadwood that men were moving to mine the gold, of course, and the madams and ladies of the evening were moving to mine the men. And this was already such a lawless time, and boomtowns hit big and fast. This allowed for anyone and everyone to come into a place that was very uncivilized. I think it's important to emphasize this, and something I feel in my previous episodes I have done a bad job of doing. Setting the stage of what a boomtown was really like. It wasn't like these people were rushing into established cities. No, a lot of the men were rushing to nothing. Pretty much. Men were arriving at these camps to do just that, camp. It wasn't like they had law and order either in these camps. So these guys here, you're hitting it, you're getting some gold in the Black Hills. Men are packing their backpacks sometimes and going down there to get there as fast as possible so that they can get a part of that. A lot of that time, that meant men were sleeping on the ground. If they were lucky enough to have a tent, they would pitch their tents. And for some of the first prospectors, they were going into a town that had, or not even a town, a camp that had nothing but other men setting up camp. So it wasn't like there was a store or a saloon, even gambling halls, anything. There wasn't much there. And there definitely wasn't any law officers or law there at all. Okay. Boomtowns, when it happened, they would hit and men would rush there, set up tents, and then women would follow because they, of course, were going to go mine those men who were mining the gold. And so eventually, with those two things happening, and they would eventually start to establish. So as the men come and the ladies come and they're there and they start bringing in money for the town to establish itself, that's when things would start to build on that, you know. But if men would get to these camps and they found nothing, and then the women found nothing, and then they moved on, then these basically would just become like ghost towns. However, Deadwood was rich with gold, so that allowed it to boom, pretty much. So Deadwood, like many boom towns of American West, was a very rough and tumbled place. The new mining town averaged 1 murder per day in the first year, which is insane, okay? That's a lot. And so with mostly men populating and bored dudes, it was quick that the town of Deadwood started filling up with many saloons, gambling establishments, dance halls, and brothels. The beginning years of the mining town of Deadwood, 90% of the female population that was there were prostitutes. And like I said, they were there to mine their own mine of men, and good for them. Most all men moving into the mining town were there to mine and hit it big and run, or even establish themselves as big timers within this new up and coming town. Al and his wife, Nettie, though, moved to Deadwood Gulch mining town in May of 1876. So he is one of the earliest non-mining men in the area. His plan was to move into the boomtown and mine the men as well. Because let's not forget, we're here to talk about selling love by the hour. Within the same week of moving into Deadwood, he had his temporary dance hall up and running within that same week. So he gets there and he gets right to business, start going. And he's one of the first people to be in this town, you know, which is kind of crazy to think about. Like, he wasn't one of the first people to be there, but like, well, actually, he kind of was, because the men that were coming, they were all coming very fast. He heard about the gold. He realized the money that could be made, so he rushes over there too. He's in Custard, so it did not take him very long to get there. They're very close, you know? And so he is one of the first people within this town, but he's definitely one of the first men that came to not try to hit it big on gold. So he sets up this canvas and lumber saloon. This canvas and lumber saloon that Al set up in Deadwood was known as the Cricket. This saloon was known for gambling and hosted prize fighting. So picture this. He gets there. It's basically a tent because they didn't have buildings, and he starts going right away on allowing gambling, drinking, I'm sure, and hosting some fights. It's already a crazy lawless town. People want money any way they can get it. And so he starts offering fights. And this is just like a prize fighting is just like your historical boxing, UFC / like bare knuckle boxing fights that some of the saloons and gambling halls provided as another form of entertainment. And the men would join in there because money, people would bet on them and they would make some money if they won. Or, you know, and think about this. This is not something that had like rules, okay? We don't have regulations like UFC and boxing does nowadays. This is all out, whatever goes. So kind of was like fight till the death or fight till the tap out kind of thing. So crazy to think about what that looked like. Although Al arrived a married man, shortly after he and Nettie arrived in Deadwood, she files for divorce from Al in September of the same year they moved, being granted the divorce due to spousal abuse. Al would go on to get married 2 more times later on in his life so he does get married a couple more times, but he would also go on and get divorced 2 more times for very, very similar claims. This is going to set the stage of what type of man Al may have been. Someone who definitely looked at women as possessions and property to do with as he wished. Please keep this in mind, that if he was doing this to his wife, what was he doing to the ladies that were coming to work for him? I put this in air quotations, and we will get to that reason why. And for those of you who are on audio, sometimes I do a bad job of enunciating when I'm quoting, like air quoting something. So I'm going to try to do a better job at that. But we're going to say a lot of articles say that women came to work for him, or the woman that worked for him. Every time I say someone worked for Al, please know that is being air quoted, okay? And we will get into why. So anyways, we aren't talking about a good standing man here. So keep that in mind, that we have documentation that even with his wives, he was a piece of shit. Anyways, after a while, Al chooses to close the Cricket and open what it will go on to be known as the Gem Theater. The Gem Theater functioned as a saloon, dance hall, brothel, and a form of theater entertainment. This was a very lavish building he goes on to build and operate, making Al our first pimp here on Paying for It. Had Al been a pimp at his other dance halls? Possibly. Most likely. However, we don't have proof of that. So we know for sure he started his long line of pimping out women in the Gem Theater. Now, my opinion on pimps and men making money off of sex workers may be very unpopular. However, I guess I don't care. I truly believe that men should not be able to profit off of the women's sex workers unless they are selling themselves and their bodies just as much as the woman is. If and when we do capitalism at its fullest and not this stupid half in, half out, or what the power that be feels will benefit them, sex sells, baby. And no matter how much we twist history, some thanks to us glorifying pimp men like Al, or just plain out changing history to skewer it in a different way, or drill into our heads that selling sex is bad, dirty, and sad life to live, unless you're a man doing it. Then you're fine. So I am one to say that I truly don't think that men should be able to capitalize on a woman selling sex unless he is also selling sex or has one time sold sex. You may feel like that's wrong, but that's my opinion. There will always be women out there who are willing and happily sell love by the hour to profit on something that, shocker, they enjoy. I think where it can go wrong, though, and horrible, is when we let some men profit off of sex when they are the target customer. There will always be exceptions to this rule, of course. That's life. But in the majority, we find that in history, where we look for the evil, the fallen, the shameful, We find it in the men who profited off of the women they sold. And I say it that way in particular because it wasn't like a lot of these men were kind. We don't see stories of men who were doing this, running brothels or saloons, being kind to those women, protecting them. Granted, this isn't always the case, but please believe me when I say a man gets a title of being a pimp. At the very least, they are profiting off of a woman doing all of the fucking work, legitimately, while giving them basically nothing. That's the very least a pimp's life. At the very least, that's what they're doing. And that is scummy anyways. Often though, pimps are often doing much, much, much worse to those girls they quote unquote pimp out. That is part of why I wanted to do this episode, because now we label Al as an early entrepreneur. Though that is true, he was a businessman. He made his money mainly off the backs of the woman he abused. And don't get it twisted, because this man did abuse women in a shady fucking way, which we'll get to. But we glorify him, and we make him out to be some badass motherfucker of the West, when that ain't true. Now, some may scream, not all pimps. Well, I haven't found a story yet that proves me wrong. So until then, I will stand by what I say. Men shouldn't profit off of sex workers unless they are selling their time and love by the hour, just like they are. Anyways, back to Al and the Gem Theater. I'm not sure if this is his first time acting as a pimp, but what I do know is that unlike most madams around him, he never had to start at the bottom, legitimately at the bottom. All because he was a white man. We already know that he treats his wives poorly and abuses them. So how do you think he chose to treat his vice dolls? Yeah, it wasn't great. Now, in the former hit series Deadwood on HBO, Al is played by Ian McShane, and he becomes a very popular and loved character of the TV show. Though I haven't watched it yet, I read about it, how he started off as your typical anti-hero, your real villain. But by the end of the first season, he is portrayed as a misunderstood, moody, but lovable protector of his woman. The real Al, though, he was never a lovable protector, and in fact was a real vile man who hired and surrounded himself by other real vile males. So let's get into it. Al opened the Gem Theater, and he knew he was going to offer sex because he's seen the mass amount of women who were hitting it big on all the men coming in, going within Deadwood. However, unlike the madams, he practiced very shady and horrible business practices in just getting the woman to come work for him. So he doesn't start off great and he doesn't end up great, okay? Often Al would recruit women from the East, most of these women coming from poor families, like farming families and stuff, in the middle of nowhere, uneducated, of course, because where were they supposed to get an education as a woman back in the 1800s? They weren't. So he would advertise in hotels jobs promising positions for women to become stage actresses, become stars. He was, of course, appealing to the young women's wants to become stars. On top of that, he claimed very high wages, which for women who had nothing, were coming from abusive families, or maybe coming from her whole family being wiped out. You know, this was so hard of a time to live in. Disease and sickness were killing families by the hour sometimes, you know. So sometimes these women were left with nothing, and the promise of this money was important. It also could have been used to be sent back to any remaining families, or maybe people who they needed to look out after now. So yeah, for this time, it was a dream job for a girl, for any young girl. It was aspiring to be the next anyone who was aspiring to be the next big thing or just aspiring to make some money, some good money, for not having to be a housemaid or seamstress, or the literally maid or seamstress were the two jobs that were offered that were considered proper for women, So to see these flyers in this advertisement that that someone is offering you to become a star or an actress and get paid very well, of course they were into that idea. So he would openly lie to get women to trust him into buying them a one-way ticket to Deadwood. Upon arriving in Deadwood and the Gem Theater, they would be confronted with Al and his true wants from them, which was to work as a girl in his brothel, selling sex for him. When the women would push back or tell him no, he would straight up just bully them. When bullying them didn't work, he would beat them into submission, effectively trapping these women in a town that they knew not a single soul around, with no money and now in debt to a very vile man who lied to get them there. For those who still stood their ground and refused to work under his vile demands, they would be thrown to the streets with nowhere to go and no one to help. This was not a time that people were kind. It was a time of very vicious time, and it was also a very vicious town. Deadwood was dangerous for men and even more dangerous for single, alone young women. He knew this and he played on it, and he knew that your fate on the streets could be way worse than working for him, even though working for him was not great. A lot of women stayed and some didn't. It is known that some, when arriving and figuring out what he actually expected them to do, the truth behind his ads, they would take their own lives. How many women he is responsible for their deaths? How many? I can't imagine that number being small. I'm not sure the true number of suicides. However, it was not uncommon for him to recruit a girl, they figure it out, be in no way able to get anywhere or move or do anything without, they arrive with nothing. He paid for their ticket, their one-way ticket. So yes, sadly, some women would refuse and they would take their own lives. And I don't ever think that's okay, of course, but I will say, at least they had the power in that, because they were not going to have any power or any freedom or anything working for Al. It also wasn't uncommon for some women to stand their ground, say no to Al, taking their chances at surviving on the motherfucking streets, even if they ended up in a different brothel. I'm not saying that some of these women who left his house didn't end up selling sex, but hopefully for most of them, wherever they went, they found someone like Dora or Molly, who, even though Molly may have been a mean girl to the girls outside of her house, she protected those in her house. So I really hope that the women who did stand their ground, say fuck you, no thanks, and left, either found their way out of Deadwood to somewhere they could go safely, or found themselves in a brothel where it was their choice and safely doing what they needed to do to survive. I don't judge them either way. I don't judge any of these women. They found themselves in a really fucking shitty situation with a really shitty man. And so some of them had to do what they had to do, and we stand for them. So yeah, a lot of women would leave and take their chances on the streets. And that was the case of Inez Sexton, who in the 1880s, unfortunately, answered the ad Al had for a stage performer. Once, though, she figured out the real job that was being given, she bravely and fiercely stood up to Al and gave him a piece of her mind, screaming at him, "Although my voice is for sale, nothing else is." Good for you, Inez. because though I stand for our historical ladies of the night, it should always be something you choose willingly, not be forced into. Inez was kicked out and was put on the streets, where she stayed for months. Please remember, this was not a time when you could, as a woman, just go find a job. This was a town that pretty much didn't have jobs for women. Though lucky for her, Inez was able to get in touch with some church members who helped her put a fundraiser together to raise money to get her back home. And I hope she got home safely and lived the rest of her life as she wanted. Those stories of women escaping Al are few and far between, sadly getting pretty much enslaved by Al and the men he hired to keep them in line. So a lot of women did come and get stuck in Al's gym theater. Those who stayed were quite often spotted around town in there or even in the theater covered in bruises, because being a bully and a liar wasn't enough for Al. He kept the ladies in line by beating them and letting the bouncers and his hired men do the same. Al hired a staff that included Dan DeHarty, who was his general manager, Johnny Burns, who was in charge of the girls, and several male bouncers. These men were pretty much a part of a boys' club who looked down upon women. They enslaved and treated them like garbage. Okay? Garbage. The men Al hired were said to be just as brutal, if not more brutal, than Al himself to the women stuck in the gem theater. Beating the woman was a common practice among the people. Beating the woman was a common practice to keep them, air quotes, in line. And if you think that the customers were treating the women any better, well, come on. You are all very much smarter than that. Men seeing the staff and the owners treat them so badly. So what would make them feel like they couldn't treat them just as bad? And this was a time when mental health was not a thing. And a lot of men had a lot of issues with a lot of things. And they couldn't take it out on some people that were stronger than them. So they would take it out on women. In the beginning of the gem theater, one of the first girls to ever willingly work for him within the brothel was apparently Calamity Jane, who arrived in Deadwood with Wild Bill Hickok in June of 1876. They arrived in the summer of the beginning of the gold rush for Deadwood. It is unclear when exactly Calamity started to work within the gem theater. However, we do know that it shows that Calamity also recruited 10 other women to come and work for Al. I'm confused about this part, honestly, because I know she worked within the gem theater. I know she brought women with her. I think when they were on the train, her and Wild Bill, there was a train full of prostitutes as well. So I'm praying and hoping that Calamity didn't know what she was recruiting these women for. But if she did, that's fucked up. Okay? Like, I don't know, and I'm hoping not, because of what we know of her seemed pretty kind, other than her spitting in the actress's eye. Yeah, so I really hope that isn't the case, but you never know, honestly. She was pretty much the one to give Al his first group of women to abuse, sadly. Now, did Calamity know that what the woman's fates were going to be? Was her fate the same? Or did he start off slow in his abuse and descend into madness? That is a mystery to history. However, either way, it doesn't sit well with me, and it shouldn't sit well with you either. The gem theater grows in popularity because it offers it all while also allowing you to do whatever you want to do. Due to the fact that he was a man, he was able to legally sell liquor and offer gambling and entertainment. Although the gem theater itself supposedly had a very opulent and beautiful interior, however, it quickly got a reputation for being a very, very violent saloon, often having very violent fights between drunken men who would often draw guns, which would lead to shootouts within the gem theater. However, the bullets weren't just for the men within the saloon. Oftentimes, the gun would also be turned on the girls, forced to work within. However, the girls didn't always just take the abuse from the men who came through the doors. A gem prostitute going by the name Trixie ended up shooting a man through the front of his skull after he beat her. This man actually didn't die right away. So he suffered on the floor of the gem theater for 30 minutes before he finally passed. I would say that sucks, but does it? So things in Deadwood are truly lawless, and crime is happening left and right. So the government decided, okay, we should get some kind of handle on this. And around March 1877, Seth Bullock was appointed as Deadwood's first official marshal. Seth was appointed to bring some law and order within this new mining town of Deadwood, which if you're thinking, oh, thank goodness someone is going to do something about this owl, well, unfortunately, not quite, because money can do a lot of things in this world. It was no different in this situation. The notorious theater went untouched because reportedly Seth and Al came to a truce pretty quickly after Seth arrived into the town. They agreed to draw an imaginary line on Main Street that marked Al's side as the Badlands, allowing Al to pretty much control and go unchecked in his area, and Sheriff Bullock went on and around, controlled everything else, and protected the rest of this town. I put protected in air quotes again because if you're not protecting everyone, you're not doing your job. Sorry, not sorry. Allowing Al to go and become an even more prominent vile man of Deadwood, going unchecked for far, far too long. This gem was highly lucrative, earning an average of $5,000 a night, and on really, really good nights, making upwards to $10,000, which is equivalent to around $275,000 today. In the summer of 1879, the Gem Theater was going to catch fire. The fire was quickly put out, and the damage was repaired and rebuilt pretty fast, not affecting business too much, unfortunately. However, 3 months later in September, when the devastating and disastrous fire of Deadwood would start in the bakery and rage through the town, claiming over 300 buildings, including the Gem Theater. If you are cheering like I was, don't celebrate too long. My celebration didn't last long either, because like most of the town, Al went straight to work rebuilding the Gem Theater from the ground up. This time making the theater even more opulent and extravagant. The Daily Times going on to say that it was the finest theater building in the area. Al would go on to continue to run his lucrative and vile establishment for years. He was known to have a talent for getting into alliances when the times called for it. When the town of Deadwood started leaning more towards proper society and its first initial cleanup, he was almost untouchable due to his alliances and his willingness to offer money to financially pay off anyone who wanted to start. This was until 1899. The Gem Theater would go on to catch fire one more time. And oh boy, was it destructive. Taking all of the work that was put into it back in 1879. The third fire doing what two previous could not do, and that was take Al out. Thank goodness. Al left Deadwood and returned to Iowa, where he would marry his third wife, Odelia Bogan, in 1899. They soon would get divorced, like I said, for spousal abuse. And for a while, Al would disappear into history where he belongs. That was until October 2nd, 1904. Lemuel, his twin brother, was attacked after leaving his meat market, where he had over $200 on him. When he was found, he suffered a major blow to the head, but he had not been robbed of his money or other belongings on him. He was taken to the hospital, but he would eventually die 8 days later to his condition. So that's kind of weird, right? So this man, he is leaving his business and he gets attacked, but nothing on him actually gets stolen. So right away we see, oh, this wasn't a robbery. It is rumored that Lamel may have been mistaken for his twin brother and attacked, accidentally killed over mistaken identity. Really, the perpetrator probably wanted to take out his brother Al. Oh, I called him Owl? Al, though, would not go unscathed, as it is suggested he had been murdered shortly after his brother. There was a bit of confusion surrounding his death for a while. It was believed he died poor, attempting to jump onto a train. However, historians believe that he actually was shot and found dead in the middle of the suburban Denver on November 15th, 1904, which would have been just a month after his brother's suspicious death. I hope that the part about him dying poor in his case was so true. Is that mean? Probably, but I don't care. It seems whoever actually wanted him gone had some kind of revenge, that they were willing to continue their rampage even after taking out the wrong brother. This also might be a controversial take, but again, I don't think I care. I hope with everything in me that his murderer was one of the many women whom he abused, getting revenge for all of the women he so greatly hurt in his past and allowed to be hurt, who he tricked and treated so very, very wrongly during his time of power. That might be wrong to say, but yeah, I just feel like if anyone deserves a little bit of revenge, it was him. All right, so this is the vile life of Al Swingen and the violent past of the Gem Theater. However, not the end of the episode quite yet, so don't go anywhere. I originally wasn't going to do an episode on Al because, I really like to focus on the women of our history and the ones who get buried in our past, and the historical ladies of the night, you know. However, when I started this journey with Dora DeFron in episode 20, I believe, he was mentioned. And as I continued down my deep dive of the Wild Wild West of Deadwood, he was mentioned a lot. In every single person's story, his name is brought up, his life and his journey. So then I was like, fuck. I should figure out who this man is and all about this dude. So I Googled him, and the first thing that comes up is the praised character of the HBO Max show. As I touched on before, he is portrayed on this show that is loosely based on his past in Deadwood, as a misunderstood, moody lover and protector. However, when separating his story from the character of the show, we see he was never misunderstood or a protector. We glorified his story to the world. And now when we mention him, we celebrate him as a true Wild West character. We now celebrate him. We have made him into a beloved man of the West. And to be honest, I hate that, and you should too. So I need to talk about it. So let's talk about it. Why am I so angry? Should I be that angry? And should you be that angry? I haven't watched Deadwood, the TV show. And I'm going to be honest, I probably am going to. One, because it has a great cast. Two, clearly a loved show. And I love history in this time period. And three, I'm able to separate fully a TV show based on history and know that that's not always, like, what they portray isn't always the truth. And that goes for any show, reality based or history based, you know? However, where is Dora? What about Molly? Or any of the ladies of Deadwood's history? Because honestly, I touched on some major players of Deadwood and the rich history of it had for prostitution. But I could go on with the ladies that made history in and out of the business of selling sex. It's upsetting because nowhere in Al's story do we see a glimpse of a good person. In his actual life trail, we can see that he was a horrible man. He was horrible. He allowed horrible treatment of women. He did horrible things. And this is just what we know. Comparing him to Dora and Molly is kind of insane. Because even comparing his life to the mean girl that was Molly Johnson, her meanness and pettiness doesn't even come close to the abuse and disgusting treatment that this man was allowed to do to the women he tricked and forced into working for him. So it's fucking crazy to me that this man gets a pedestal even now years later without being absolutely honest about his character, who he was as a man. Bringing me to the very first point that I ever made in my first 2 episodes. We glorify the men of vice, who more often than not don't deserve it. We pity and look down upon and victimize our strong, independent women of the past. It's odd. We always use the excuse that women who chose to get into sex work never chose it. They were troubled, dirty, and lost, needed saving. But then here we are talking about this man who was so vile to the women just to try to prove a point. But these women never chose that life. They thought they were getting a different job. So it's so weird to me because it's almost like here we are. We can't glorify Dora, who was a kind woman, who did well by her girls, who treated them kindly, who took care of them, actually protected them, because then it would say, oh, maybe they didn't all have a horrible life. We have to glorify this man and his American pimp ways because that shows us what we need to see, or what they want us to see and what they want us to believe when it comes to women in the sex industry. Ugh, it's so gross to me. Getting into their stories, though, we see a lot of the women just played the cards they were given in the world that didn't allow women to be anything but their fathers, then their husbands' properties. Those who chose to be independent, make their own money, and live a life that allowed them to have some say, all while being a decent fucking person. Molly Johnson was petty and a mean girl to others that didn't work for her, which, yes, bitch move, but she wasn't luring young girls to abuse and force them to work for her. She took care of her girls, protected them, and loved them, treated them like family. Nowhere in Hal's story do we see that. Fuck, they don't even mention that he was charitable. In fact, it's most likely he wasn't because he was too busy paying people off so that he could continue to be a shitty person. Dora, she was way more successful running a string of brothels in camps around Deadwood. She ran a motherfucking empire, not once ever having to lie, beat, or hire a manager to beat her women into submission. We already know that she was incredibly, incredibly kind, who was also extremely charitable. And on top of that, when her town needed her, she was there, giving her time and her love to the sick. Though through all of my research on the main players of Deadwood, I was surprised that even in Dora's life story, the articles written of her still can't help framing her life as if it was dirty. Though she was extremely successful and her life seems to show that she wasn't a victim nor treated her women as one either. So in conclusion of Deadwood, it is so frustrating to see such a rich history that can't be told if we don't include the beautiful women of our past who deserve for us to finally bring their name out of the dark, shameless space and put them in the lights and praise them for all that they were able to accomplish in a time that definitely wasn't made for them. And stop, for the love of God, glorifying men of our past who don't fucking deserve it. I am sorry, but Al was a shitty man, and Seth was a shitty sheriff. To allow this horrible abuse to go on in the Gem Theater because he didn't want to deal with it. So this is me and my attempt at putting Al's name into shame and the dark where it belongs in my own way. And so, yeah, all right, sorry, rant over. That, my friends, was the story of the good, the bad, and the ugly of Al Swingen and the Gem Theater, and the conclusion of our deep dive into Deadwood, South Dakota, and all of the lovely women that helped the town grow into what it is today, which is now a town that celebrates its vice as it almost went into ghost town territory before they legalized gambling and play into its rich Wild West history. Now definitely on my bucket list of places to visit so I can walk among the history of our lovely ladies of the evening. With that being said, that is all I have for you today, and that's the end of Deadwood, South Dakota. Although I could go on more in depth for how prostitution thrived in the 1920s through the 60s. However, that will have to wait for another time because I'm sure you're a bit fatigued of hearing me say Deadwood so many times. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing, following, leaving a review, and liking. It helps out a lot here on Paying For It. Thank you for being here, and I look forward to meeting you again next week, where we will be back to talking about another historical lady of the night. Until then, goodbye.
I got something between my legs that'll make a dead man come. Oh, that. I got something between my legs that'll make a dead man come. Oh.